You know that buzz at the airport? The one that usually means exciting trips or happy reunions. Well, for me, it turned into the soundtrack for the worst moment of my life. One minute I was just a mom seeing my family off. The next, it was like I was a ghost, completely invisible to the one person I'd poured everything into. Her words, "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is just how it has to be," just bounced around in the empty space where my heart should have been. It was a cold ending to a lifetime of love. And as their plane pulled away, leaving me stuck in a crowd of strangers, I wasn't just left behind. It felt like I'd been erased. I just stood there, frozen, long after the plane carrying my daughter, Rebecca, her husband, and my grandkids was just a tiny dot in the sky. The gate agent had already moved on, her voice calling out another flight, another round of goodbyes, another set of lives unfolding. But for me, time had just shattered. The air felt thick with her quick apology, like a tiny, useless bandage on a massive wound. Abandoned. The word just clawed at me. It wasn't just being physically left. It was this awful, crushing feeling of being insignificant, the sudden, harsh truth that my love, everything I was, had become disposable. The busy terminal with all its travelers felt like it was mocking me. Every happy family, every tearful goodbye, every hug, it was like a fresh stab reminding me of the connection I just lost. I was an island of sadness in a sea of people moving on, watching life go on while mine felt like it had just broken apart. I kept replaying it in my head so clearly it hurt. Rebecca wouldn't look me in the eye, her hand already on her own daughter's. She gave me a quick, almost dismissive hug. "We'll call when we land," she said, but the words felt so empty, like she was just going through the motions. Her husband, Mark, just gave a stiff nod, clearly uncomfortable. Even the kids, who usually rush over for one last hug, seemed to pick up on the tension. Their goodbyes were hesitant, almost like they'd been told what to say. I'd driven them to the airport, helped with their bags. The usual routine for a mom seeing her family off on a trip I wasn't invited to. That was a detail I'd tried to ignore with my morning coffee. But this was totally different. This wasn't just being left out of a vacation. This felt like a deliberate, calculated cut. The gate area, which had been buzzing with their quiet pre-boarding chat just moments before, suddenly felt huge and empty. The final call for their flight came and Rebecca turned to me, that hollow apology just falling from her lips. "I'm sorry, Mom, I really am, but this is just how it has to be." No explanation. No more talk. Just a statement like I was some inconvenient suitcase they'd decided not to bother with. She didn't look back. Not even once. I watched them walk down the jet bridge, a little family unit complete without me, and disappear into the plane. And a part of me disappeared with them. I just stood there like a statue made of disbelief in a pain so deep it literally took my breath away. My legs felt like they were filled with lead and my hands were numb. Around me life just kept going. A young couple nearby was kissing passionately, totally unaware of my silent world falling apart. A toddler squealed with joy as her dad swung her in the air. Another family, loaded down with souvenirs, was laughing and sharing a story, obviously coming back from a great trip. Every little scene of connection, of people belonging together, felt like a new attack. I felt the sting of tears, hot and unwanted, blurring the faces around me. The world was this vibrant, moving picture of people interacting, and I was just a single frayed thread snipped off and thrown away. The shiny airport floor reflected the harsh lights, and in that reflection, I saw a woman I barely knew, lost, alone, and completely devastated. The announcement for the next flight from that same gate started up, a cheerful voice telling passengers to get ready to board. The sound hit me like a punch, forcing me to realize that the world hadn't stopped, even if mine felt like it had. The sheer normality of it all, next to the extraordinary pain I was in, was torture. I was just adrift, a lonely figure in a place full of departures and arrivals, painfully aware that my own departure from my daughter's life had just been made official, and not kindly. Eventually, the numbness wore off and my legs started to ache with this heavy feeling. I finally made myself turn and walk away from the gate that had become a symbol of my abandonment. That walk back through the huge terminal, it was without a doubt the longest walk of my life. Every step felt heavy, not just physically but with the crushing weight of what I was realizing. It wasn't just a walk through an airport. It was like walking through the ruins of my own heart, admitting a failure so deep it shook me to my core. With every gate I passed, every busy shop, every stranger's face, memories started popping up, sharp and unwanted. Little things that didn't seem like much at the time, now started to form a pretty disturbing picture. I thought about all those family gatherings, holidays I'd spent weeks planning, cooking, making sure every little thing was perfect, only to feel more like the unpaid help than a cherished mom or grandma. Rebecca would show up, enjoy everything I'd done, and then leave the cleanup to me, often saying something like, "Oh, mom's got it," as if my time and energy were just endless resources for her. I remembered birthdays, anniversaries, big celebrations where the gifts I'd picked out with so much love were met with polite but distracted thank yous, then quickly put aside. Sometimes I suspected they were even forgotten. Old conversations echoed in my head. The times I'd offered advice based on my own experience and wanting her to be happy, only to have her dismiss it with a condescending, "Things are different now, Mom." Or worse, she'd just sigh impatiently, like my views were some ancient artifact, totally irrelevant to her modern life. I remembered the subtle ways I was excluded, the family trips I only heard about after they happened, the big decisions made without even a courtesy call. Each memory was a tiny pinprick, but together, they wove a tapestry of being disregarded, a slow, steady fading of my place in her life. I thought of all the sacrifices, big and small, I'd made over the years, always putting her needs, her happiness, her future before my own. My career, which once looked promising, I'd willingly put on pause to make sure she had a parent who was always there. My own hobbies and interests had faded away, replaced by the all-consuming job of being a mother. I'd done it all gladly with no regrets, thinking it was the foundation of a loving two-way relationship. But standing there in that sterile airport corridor, it felt like all that love had been devalued, returned unpaid. The airport, a place of comings and goings, became a place where my thoughts churned. I saw my reflection in the dark window of a closed shop, a woman who looked tired, sure, but also smaller. When had I let myself become so secondary in my own life story? When had my fierce love for my daughter turned into silently accepting her casual indifference? The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had poured so much of myself into her family, that I'd forgotten to save any for myself. I had made her my sun, and I was just a planet stuck in her orbit, my own light gone out. The pain wasn't just about this one act of being left at the gate. It was the culmination of years of unspoken hurts, of a slow drifting apart that I'd been too blind or maybe too hopeful to see. I'd mistaken her growing independence for a strength that would always include me, always value the foundation I'd given her. Instead, it seemed her independence had become a fortress and I was definitely on the outside. Every step towards the exit was a step deeper into this bleak understanding. The cheerful flight announcements, the snippets of excited chatter from other travelers, it all just highlighted the silence and desolation growing inside me. My daughter, the person I loved most in the world, hadn't just left me at an airport gate. She had, in that moment, pretty much confirmed that I was no longer an essential part of her journey. By the time I got to the main concourse, that first wave of paralyzing grief had started to fade, replaced by a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Surprisingly, my mind started to clear. The fog of emotional shock was lifting, and in its place something else was starting to emerge. Something that felt a bit like anger, but underneath it, a tiny spark of resolve. I wasn't just a victim here. I had options, I had resources. Resources Rebecca knew about, maybe even took for granted. I found a quiet corner away from the crowds and pulled out my phone. My fingers were still trembling a little as I scrolled through my contacts and found the number for my pilot. It had been a while since I'd used the private jet for anything other than a few business trips before I semi-retired, or the rare, indulgent holiday from a life that now felt like a distant dream. It was a symbol of a life I had built, a life that was mine, separate from being a mother. "James," I said, my voice steadier than I thought it would be. "I need the plane. As soon as possible. Destination: Teterboro." My lawyer's office wasn't far from there. He didn't hesitate. Just a calm, "Understood. I'll have it ready within the hour. Will you be at the private terminal?" "Yes," I replied. That single word felt more decisive than anything I'd said or done in years. Hanging up, I felt a small shift inside me. Making that call, taking that one definite step, was like a tiny crack in the wall of despair that had surrounded me. Boarding that sleek, familiar aircraft felt almost unreal. The plush leather seats, the quiet hum of the engines, the respectful greeting from the crew. It was a world away from the crowded commercial gate, from the hurried, impersonal dismissal I'd just faced. As the jet taxied to the runway, I saw other commercial planes like the one carrying Rebecca and her family, lining up, anonymous planes filled with countless stories. But this plane, this was mine. This journey was mine. As we climbed, up above the clouds, the city shrinking below, a deep sense of solitude washed over me. But this solitude was different from the isolating loneliness I'd felt at the gate. Here in the quiet cabin there was space to breathe, to think. The raw emotion of being abandoned was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. Instead, my mind started to work, to analyze, to connect the dots of a lifetime. I thought about how I'd raised Rebecca. I'd always prided myself on raising a strong, independent woman. I'd encouraged her to think for herself, to go after her dreams, to never let anyone make her feel small. I'd cheered for every success, celebrated her fierce spirit. And she had become that woman, confident, assertive, sometimes I now realized a little too much so. In pushing her to be independent, had I accidentally taught her that needing someone, especially her mother, was a weakness? Had my constant support, my always being there, become so predictable that it was just expected? Taken for granted like the air she breathed? The irony was a bitter pill. I'd wanted her to be strong, and she was. So strong, in fact, that she could cut our connection with such chilling efficiency. What happened at the airport wasn't a one-off. It was the climax of a pattern I'd failed to see, or maybe refused to see. My love and devotion, I realized with a pang, had been unconditional. But her respect and consideration for me? Apparently, that had become very conditional, depending on her convenience, her desires. The higher we flew, the clearer things became. It was as if the physical altitude was giving me an emotional one too. This wake-up call wasn't just a gentle nudge. It was a deafening alarm bell, shattering the illusions I'd carefully built around my relationship with my daughter. I'd been living in a past where I was essential, while she had long since moved into a future where I was, at best, on the sidelines. The pain of this realization was huge, but it was also strangely liberating. If I was no longer defined by her needing me, then who was I? The question hung in the air, vast and full of terrifying yet thrilling possibility. The woman who had walked numbly away from that gate wasn't the same woman now soaring miles above the earth. A shift had begun, subtle but unmistakable. The victim was fading, and in her place, someone else was starting to stir. Someone who remembered her own strength, her own worth, long before it got all tangled up with being mother. That flight, in the quiet solitude of the jet, became more than just a trip from one city to another. It was a profound journey inward. The miles slipping away below us were like the years of my life I was now re-examining, sifting through memories not just for pain, but for understanding, for the forgotten bits of myself. The initial shock of abandonment had passed, leaving behind a turbulent sea of emotions. But now, within that turbulence, new currents were forming. The raw, agonizing hurt was slowly, almost imperceptibly, starting to change into something else, something harder, more focused. It wasn't a cold, vengeful anger, but a quiet, steely resolve. A sense of purpose, a purpose I hadn't felt in years, maybe decades, began to flicker within me. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back, further than just Rebecca's adult years. I went back to the woman I'd been before marriage, before motherhood. A woman with her own dreams, her own ambitions. I had a career back then, one I was passionate about, one where I was respected for my mind and drive. I had friends I laughed with, debated with, hobbies that fed my soul. Where had that woman gone? She hadn't died, she'd simply been put away, packed up carefully like a beautiful dress you save for special occasions, while the all-consuming role of mother took over. I had willingly, lovingly taken on that role, believing it was the most important one I'd ever play. And it was important, incredibly so. But it wasn't supposed to be the only role. Realizing I'd allowed my own identity to get so completely swallowed by motherhood was a harsh truth. It wasn't just Rebecca's fault, it was mine too. I'd let the lines blur, had given so much that there was little left of me, the individual. My love had been like a vast ocean, but I'd forgotten to build my own lighthouse on the shore. The decision to fly to my lawyer, which at first was just a gut reaction born of hurt and a desperate need to do something, now felt like a clear, strategic move. This wasn't about punishing Rebecca, though the thought of protecting my assets from any sense of entitlement definitely crossed my mind. No, this was about reclaiming what was mine, not just financially but emotionally, existentially. It was about redefining my future. A future that would now, out of necessity and by choice, revolve around my own well-being, my own desires, my own terms. The aircraft sliced through the sky, a silver arrow pointing towards a new horizon. With every mile I felt like I was shedding old skin. The heavy cloak of maternal duty, which had recently felt like a lead weight of unappreciated sacrifice, began to feel lighter. The pain of her abandonment was still a tender bruise, but it was no longer the center of my world. Instead, it was becoming the catalyst, the unexpected, brutal gift that was forcing me to look inward, to rediscover the woman I'd put aside for so long. It's a strange kind of freedom, isn't it? Born from an act of profound unkindness, yet freedom all the same. I was free from the constant, often unrewarded, effort of trying to get her approval, her acknowledgement. I was free from the quiet worries about whether I was doing enough, being enough for her. The responsibility for my happiness, which I'd unconsciously handed over to her and her family, was now back firmly in my own hands. And while that was a scary thought, it was also exhilarating. My mind raced with possibilities. What would I do with this newfound, or rather reclaimed, independence? The law office was the first step, a practical necessity to secure my future. But after that, maybe I'd travel not to fill a void, but to see the world with fresh eyes, my own eyes. Maybe I'd dust off old passions or find new ones. Maybe I'd reconnect with old friends, people who knew me as more than just Rebecca's mother. The future, which just a short while ago had seemed like a bleak, empty space, now shimmered with potential. The woman who boarded this jet, broken and adrift, was transforming slowly but surely into a woman with a compass, a woman charting her own course. It wasn't just the plane that was ascending, it was my own spirit. Section 5. Reclaiming herself, the lawyer's office and beyond. The descent into Teterboro was smooth, the city lights sprawling below like a carpet of scattered jewels. As the wheels touched down, a sense of calm, of quiet determination had settled over me. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, crisp understanding of what I needed to do. This wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration, restoring my dignity, my independence, and my future. My lawyer, Arthur, was an old friend as well as a trusted advisor. He'd known me for decades, seen me through building my late husband's estate and then managing my own affairs. When I walked into his office, he greeted me with his usual warmth, but his sharp eyes quickly noticed that something was different, something profound had shifted in me. I didn't pour out the whole emotional story of the airport in a flood of tears, though he would have listened patiently if I had. Instead, I told him what happened calmly, factually. I explained Rebecca's words, her actions, the chilling finality of it all. And then I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to review my will, my trusts, all my estate plans. I wanted to make sure my assets were protected and that my future plans reflected my current reality, not the outdated idea of a family dynamic that clearly didn't exist anymore. Arthur listened intently, his expression growing more serious as I spoke. He didn't offer empty comforts or try to downplay what had happened. He understood how serious this was, not just legally but personally. "This is a big step, Eleanor," he said gently when I'd finished. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "Arthur," I replied, my voice steady, unwavering, "I haven't been this sure about anything in years. This isn't about anger, not anymore. It's about facing a truth I've avoided for too long. It's about self-preservation and, frankly, self-respect." We spent the next few hours going over documents, discussing options, planning a strategy. With every decision made, every instruction given, I felt a layer of the old, accommodating Eleanor falling away. It was like carefully pruning a neglected rose bush, cutting away the overgrown, dead branches so new healthy growth could come through. There was a quiet strength in the precise legal language, a comforting solidity in the structured way we were redefining my affairs. This was no longer about the emotional chaos of family betrayal. This was about calmly, rationally rebuilding my independence. Leaving Arthur's office later that day, I felt lighter. Not giddy, not triumphant in a showy way, but filled with a quiet, internal strength. The woman who had stood shattered at that airport gate was a distant memory. The woman who walked out onto the busy New Jersey street was someone new, or rather, someone rediscovered. She was Eleanor, a woman of substance, a woman with agency, a woman who was now definitely the architect of her own life. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of sadness, of grief for the relationship I thought I had, for the daughter I had loved so fiercely. But those feelings wouldn't define me anymore. They'd be part of my story, yes, but not the whole story. The empowerment wasn't a sudden, dramatic explosion, but a steady, internal flame, rekindled in the ashes of heartbreak. It was the quiet resolve to build a life on my own terms, to find joy in my own pursuits, to nurture relationships that were mutual and respectful. The private jet that had carried me here was more than just a plane. It was a symbol of my rise from despair, a vessel carrying me towards a future I would now consciously and courageously create for myself. The transformation was happening not as some grand show, but as a deep, resonant shift within, a reclaiming of self that was both profound and profoundly liberating. This whole thing started with a moment of incredible pain, but it led to an unexpected awakening. Have you ever had a moment like that in your life? A painful experience or a shocking realization that ended up being the catalyst for a huge personal change? I'd love to hear about your turning points in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, please consider liking this and subscribing for more reflections on life's unexpected journeys. That flight to my lawyer? It was more than just a trip. It was a journey from a life defined by how someone else saw my worth, to a life grounded in my own value. The daughter who left me at that gate, well, she inadvertently gave me a painful yet priceless gift, the push to reclaim myself. The heartbreak was real, the sense of loss huge. But through that fire of emotion, a new understanding was forged. My identity isn't just mother, and my happiness doesn't depend on the approval or presence of people who might not fully value me. This journey taught me about resilience, about how we can find a new direction even after hitting rock bottom. It's about the quiet power that comes from drawing a line in the sand, not in anger but in firm self-advocacy. It's about understanding that self-respect isn't a luxury, it's essential. My story isn't about revenge or cutting ties with bitterness, but about recognizing when a chapter has closed and having the courage to write a new one on my own terms. The empowerment I feel now isn't loud or flashy. It's a steady, quiet confidence, a knowing that I am complete, whole, and capable, no matter who chooses to walk beside me. The sun also rises, and for me it feels like a new dawn, full of possibilities I'm finally ready to embrace.